All right, everyone. After multiple rounds of voting, the Libertarians finally chose their nominee. It's Chase Oliver. He's from the classically liberal side of Libertarianism, so a little bit less of a hardliner than like what you get with the Mises Caucus. It was interesting because I was looking into some of the statements about this, and some libertarians, they're very prosaic about this. It's like, well, you know, RFK Jr. is kind of stealing the protest vote thunder, and so the normal circumstances right now, because there are a lot of people that don't like Trump or Biden, we'd probably be polling pretty well, but really RFK Jr. has stolen that vote. I would point out something, though. The libertarians are fooling themselves. I'm a small L libertarian. I lean more towards classical liberalism in what I believe is the original civic sense, which means no, I'm not an ANCAP, not really a monarchist either, although they're a bit more pragmatic. You maintain a night watchman state, so to speak. The libertarians are fooling themselves if they think that somebody who would be inclined to vote for a rabid anti-gunner climate hawk in favor of reparations, which is RFK Jr., would otherwise be libertarians. Yeah, you'd get some element of protest vote, but anyone who was intelligent enough to look at the ideology, if you're a libertarian and you're casting a vote for RFK Jr., it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. He's an authoritarian to the core, and a fairly severe one on numerous important issues. Trump, of course, made an appearance there as well. He and RFK Jr. are both there, asking the Libertarians for the nomination. I assure you that neither of them expected to get it. In fact, they're probably surprised that a single person in the room voted for them on the first ballot. It's ludicrous to believe that Trump or even RFK Jr. be so delusional that they thought they had any chance whatsoever. Name recognition means nothing to a political movement of the kind that libertarianism tends to be. I've cautioned that if you really want liberty, you do have to be more pragmatic and strategic. That's not what a lot of libertarians believe. It's more about ideological purism. And so they get defeated. The last time that a libertarian candidate cracked 3-4 points in any of the states and really had a pulse national, it was Gary Johnson. Again, part of that was a protest vote. Some people said, well, I'm not voting for Hillary because she scares the shit out of me, but everyone keeps telling me this new guy is going to start World War III and is the devil, so I think that I'll sit this one out. I'll vote for the dude who doesn't know what Aleppo is. That made a whole lot of sense, by the way. Jorgensen managed to come in halfway behind that. Chase Oliver, by the way, is gay, and so this is considered amusing by some people and for some reason of political import. Link in the description, archived of course. He seems like a relatively innocuous figure, and he does have enough campaign material and volunteers to wage a national campaign. But we need to understand that fundamentally the majority of the population, number one, boils down back into football team mentality for partisan purposes or voting against the other guy, lesser of two evils mode. That's the majority of the population, including the upswelling group of American citizens, it's now the majority, who don't have a strong party affiliation at all. They're not registered with a political party. Party registration has fallen to a very long-term low at the moment, and now a more sizable chunk of people are independent voters than Democrats or Republicans. You would think that that would be a good ideological source from which the libertarians could draw from. The problem is that the reason that those people are independent voters is that they have a hodgepodge of different authoritarian and quasi-authoritarian tendencies based partially on the party's ideology that they're so familiar with. So they may, if they're more on the liberty-loving side, for example, use myself as an example, I think that the Democrats, at least until recently with Ralph Northam and some of the screwy shit going on with them, had been more right on abortion as an issue. I'm pro-choice. More Republicans seem to want to ban it. Then you have the rise of the really, really far leftoids that wanted to make it like third trimester abortion's okay, and then that sort of switches it, but years ago. On guns, I'm ideologically puristic. I would be a hard-line libertarian on that. Therefore, if I'm only looking at the mainline parties and don't understand libertarians exist at all, I will tend to side with the Republicans, because at least they talk a big game about wanting to respect gun rights. They don't. I understand this. We should abolish the NFA and all gun control. I agree with that. But they're better than the Democrats, so to speak. So the independent voter is just trying to figure out which one of the mainline parties they're supporting, unless it's a protest vote. Fundamentally, you're right, RFK Jr. does steal some votes from the LP, but I can't imagine it would be his entire total. I can't imagine that in the absence of RFK Jr. as a figure within this race that the LP would magically hit 10%. For example. I just don't think that that would be feasible. There aren't enough people with those ideological leanings, even if you have a more moderate candidate in there. So Chase Oliver has been chosen as nominee. It took him, 8 rounds of voting? Trump and RFK Jr. were ushered on their way in the first round, which again is not surprising. Trump's not libertarian either. Again, he's better than the average. He's better than neocons. He's much more populistic. He represents more 880s style devolved cronyism than he does a libertarian movement. The idea of trying to get libertarians to vote for him when he's the nominee, by the way, though, is a good idea. If he can grab up a small proportion of those votes, Biden goes bye-bye, and we have the ultimate political meme of the century, arguably of rememberable American history in totality. It's been a while since something that strange has happened. You got the indictment of the first former president. You have the possibility that he gets a non-consecutive second term. Chaos could erupt. Whatever happens in this election, the only outcome will be madness anyway, so it's going to be entertaining to be along for the ride. The Libertarians are only really being, by the way, talked about right now, and nobody would know who this dude is, and most of them would ignore the story completely if Trump hadn't shown up. And RFK Jr. The oddity is that the non-libertarians that showed up just to make a speech and then leave and knew from the get-go they didn't have a chance are the reason why it's being given so much press. If anything, they should be thanking Trump and RFK Jr. for being the two most well-known people that ever were on the stage that night. I say this as someone who has a fondness for the Libertarian Party, but the strategy and the organization just generally aren't there. And trying to blame RFK Jr. for, robbing the protest vote. My goodness. Most of those protest voters in the end would have written in Mickey Mouse or they would have chosen lesser of two evils. In the end, by the way, they'll do it anyway. RFK Jr. is not going to come in at 10 points in the election. I hope that people realize this. Once they get to the ballot box, a significant proportion of the people that are polling in favor of him will say, okay, I like RFK Jr. for whatever inexplicable fucking reason, but these are the two people that I really have to choose from because they're the ones, one of them will be elected. Which one do I dislike less? That's what they'll ask themselves in the ballot box. That'll be probably a third, maybe even half of all of those RFK Jr. voters. That's about all. Peace out.